Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I am so excited because this is the 10th episode of this podcast. When I first developed the idea for it, it was my goal to record at least 10 episodes before releasing any, just to prove to myself that I was really going to do it. And so now I'm really excited because I'm recording this 10th episode on the eve of publishing the first 3 episodes and following this week to week. So I'm really excited because it won't mean anything to you by the time you listen, but for me, it's a big deal. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you so much for being here for our 10th episode. And for this one, we are going to continue with reading another short essay from Michael Jackson's book, Dancing the Dream. This one is a little bit shorter than the previous one, but I'll be honest, I don't remember a lot about it. So we are going to rediscover it together with a reading and discussion. This essay is called The Boy and the Pillow. The Boy and the Pillow. A wise father wanted to teach his young son a lesson. Here is a pillow covered in silk brocade and stuffed with the rarest goose down in the land, he said. Go to town and see what it will fetch. First the boy went to the marketplace, where he saw a wealthy feather merchant. What will you give me for this pillow? He asked. The merchant narrowed his eyes. I will give you 50 gold ducats, for I see that this is a rare treasure indeed. The boy thanked him and went on. Next he saw a farmer's wife peddling vegetables by the side of the road. What will you give me for this pillow? He asked. She felt it and exclaimed, How soft it is! I'll give you 1 piece of silver, for I long to lay my weary head on such a pillow. The boy thanked her and walked on. Finally, he saw a young peasant girl washing the steps of a church. What will you give me for this pillow? He asked. Looking at him with a strange smile, she replied, I'll give you a penny, for I can see that your pillow is hard compared to these stones. Without hesitation, the boy laid the pillow at her feet. When he got home, he said to his father, I have gotten the best price for your pillow, and he held out the penny. What? His father exclaimed. That pillow was worth 100 gold ducats, at least. That's what a wealthy merchant saw, the boy said, but being greedy, he offered me 50. I got a better offer than that. A farmer's wife offered me 1 piece of silver. Are you mad? His father said. When is 1 piece of silver worth more than 50 gold ducats? When it's offered out of love, the boy replied. If she had given me more, she wouldn't have been able to feed her children. Yet I got a better offer than that. I saw a peasant girl watching the steps of a church who offered me this penny. You have lost your wits completely, his father said, shaking his head. When is a penny worth more than a piece of silver? When it's offered out of devotion, the boy replied. For she was laboring for her Lord, and the steps of his house seemed softer than any pillow. Poorer than the poorest, she still had time for God, and that is why I offered her the pillow. At this, the wise father smiled and embraced his son, and with a tear in his eyes he murmured, You have learned well. This is one of the shorter pieces we have read in a while from Dancing the Dream. And it's an interesting piece because I kind of expected it to go somewhere else. Specifically, I was thinking about how you might say the best price or the best offer is the one that's given with the most sincerity. When someone has so little and they offer more and are willing to give more, that means more, right? Like relative to what they actually have. So like if the peasant girl offered a penny because she only had a penny, that would certainly be worth more as an offer than someone offering a piece of silver if they had a lot, or 50 ducats if they had, 1,000. But that's not where he went with it. Ultimately, for him, the lesson was about God and devotion, which, again, it's just not what I expected, especially when comparing his reasoning for how he perceived the farmer's wife and the young peasant girl, the differences between them. As we've discussed, Michael was obviously a religious person, a spiritual person, however you want to think about it. It's pretty clear faith played a big part in his life in a number of ways. It is interesting, though, that the girl's devotion to God was such an important piece of this. If we kind of zoom out from that, not just thinking about the religious component, but about upholding values and believing in something outside of yourself, something greater than yourself, so that you're not just, your eyes don't just widen at the sight of luxury goods or money or anything. You can think about this actually having more layers. So if you're not a particularly religious person, you can think about the importance that he's portraying here about just having values and being devoted to believing in something, even if your life might be easier if you didn't. Also, even thinking about how, he says this little girl had nothing, but she still had time for God. Well, many of us have more than nothing. Many of us have something to live off of, to survive with, and we still give very little elsewhere. I'm saying we, just as a collective, because I think it's generally true. Most of us, if we look at our own lives, we could probably do more or give more. It depends. We're all different. Sometimes you can only give so much. I guess that's part of the question I would have for Michael about this. Is there a limit to how much we should give when we don't have a lot to begin with? I mean, many of us know Michael was a person of extreme philanthropy. He certainly gave a lot of himself, both in money as well as time. Something I think about all the time, actually, was his level of charity, which was borderline insane if you think about it. And by that I mean, I think an overlooked fact about Michael is not just the monetary value of what he donated, or even the fact that he spent so much time visiting hospitals and orphanages and things, but the fact that the entire Dangerous tour, which lasted years in the early 90s, he donated all of the proceeds to Heal the World, which was his charitable foundation. I mean, just the fact that he did that it's crazy from the perspective that no one else would. I mean, perhaps others have, and I'm not aware of it, because I was not aware of it before becoming a Michael fan, that he had this type of philanthropic spirit. But that just sort of blows my mind. That is not an example of me saying someone shouldn't donate or questioning it. I guess it's just interesting to think about the value of how much we admire people who give when they have very little themselves. It's of course an admirable trait and quality, but it's just something I think is worth discussing. Given how much Michael gave of himself, I think a lot of us fans at times wish he gave less to fewer people. If you know the kind of intricacies of some of his legal issues over the years, it often involved him giving a lot to people when, had he not, perhaps certain things wouldn't have happened. But again, there's something to admire in that level of devotion about a person who is so devoted to what they believe in, whether that is God or serving humanity or a certain type of goodness. There is something admirable about that. What I love about these pieces is that they really do feel on some level like you're reading some ancient book. I don't know. To me, they do. They're like these, I can't think of the word. They're not like fairy tales. They're not fables because they don't involve, they're just I can't think of the word, little lessons, I'll think of the word. Maybe not in the 10th episode, but maybe the 11th, I'll think of the word. But they have the way he writes them is so interesting to me because I could read this now and I could read this in 100 years or 1,000 years, or someone could have read this 1,000 years ago and it would still make sense, and that's kind of the timelessness is kind of crazy when you think about it. You would have no way of knowing if you read this that this was written and published, or that this was published in 1992. There's nothing indicating that. I also think it's interesting to think about Michael and this story. Obviously, we know about the relationship with his father and the challenges they had. I think of the story about how Michael, when he was very young, I think this was in Moonwalk, but I know I've heard it multiple other places as well. When he was young, still in Gary, Indiana, when they started making money as the Jackson 5, he would spend the money he was given on candy and then give it away to the children in the neighborhood. And I think this could have been in Moonwalk. It may have been in You Are Not Alone, Jermaine Jackson's book. I'm not sure. Either way, there was this story about how Joseph Jackson, his father, got angry at him for not selling it for profit, but for giving it away instead. And I think it's interesting he chooses the father-son dynamic here to tell this story. And the father in this story is at first angry, but then receptive. I can't help but wonder if that is in part something maybe Michael wished his father had reacted that way, or maybe he, looking back on it now as an adult, looking back at his child self, maybe perhaps sees even more of the kind of wisdom of generosity that he had. I just think it's notable. There's no reason to truly dissect that, but I think it's notable. Something I forgot to mention before I started reading this piece is that, now this is the 10th piece in the book, but it's also a piece that features a photo of Michael. Now this is the photo that is, or was the alternative photo for the Bad album cover. If you're not familiar with it, it is a photo of Michael looking directly into the camera through what looks like black lace. Now, I know that this was actually photographed with the black lace over the camera, I believe, and it was modeled after a vintage shot of some kind that Michael loved. I should have the trivia on hand for you, but I do not. Anyway, it's a popular image within the fan community, and it's what Michael had initially wanted the cover of Bad to look like. And don't get me wrong, I actually really love the cover of Bad. However, I would have loved to see him go in this direction. It's not quite a black and white photo, but there's a lot of black. There's black all surrounding him, bordering his face. There's just the colors of his eyes looking at you, his skin. and you can see the beautiful overlay of lace covering his face. It's a weirdly powerful image, I think. Maybe it's his eye contact. I don't know. The fact that he had insanely beautiful eyes. I don't know. But it's a really interesting image. And I'm very curious about it being paired with this. Now, I'll be honest, it's not always clear to me why certain images are paired with certain pieces. As I mentioned, probably more than once, there's an element of this book that feels like a collector's item of photos, which is fine and serves its own purpose, but I like to believe, or I want to believe, there is some sort of, more meaningful reason why certain photos are paired with certain pieces. This photo being paired with this essay, the reason isn't completely clear to me, but I want to contemplate it a bit more because similar pieces either do not have any kind of visual, or they seem to have a drawing or some other type that is not necessarily of Michael. I like that this one is, though. I would love to know more about this photo and what Michael was hoping to communicate with this photo, what he hoped it would represent on the Bad album. It makes me wonder, of course, how much does the cover art reflect the contents of an album? How much does the imagery or aesthetic of an album or a time period reflect the music that you end up including? So, for example, had he had this as the cover of the Bad album, would we have maybe seen Al Capone or Streetwalker or I'm So Blue or, one of those other songs on Bad, rather than only being released after his death as part of an anniversary collection? I don't know. This is not about the poem, obviously, but it's the photo, and the photo is a part of the story of this work. Either way, I think there's something there. It's clearly something that he was comfortable and wanted to release, but what he was trying to say and why with this piece, I'm not sure. So I hope to contemplate it more, perhaps circle back to it in another episode. But for now, I want to wrap up because The Boy and the Pillow, very short piece, but it certainly gives us a lot to think about. So I want to thank you so much for joining me again for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. And I look forward to talking to you again soon in the next one as we continue with our journey of reading Dancing the Dream.